example for tectonic? Well, it depends on the case studies you did in your school. So it's school specific, and it's also course specific, whether you're doing A level or GCSE. But on the whole, you need to know a case study for low income countries. Tends to be Nepal as a country, and Haiti, a country most people learn about. It tends to be and a high income country, so it tends to be Tohoku in Japan, or it tends to be the likes of Italy and L'Aquila, or even Christchurch in New Zealand are likely to be the examples. The key thing here is you need an example of a low income country and a high income country tectonic case study to be able to compare the two. So this question is obviously aimed at A-level students. It's a difficult one. It's the one most people struggle with. But the key thing is that lithology is a way a coastline is layered, okay, or laid out. So the lithology of the coastline, you're talking about concordant, you're talking about discordant coastlines, you're talking about the layering of the rock types, okay? So in a concordant coastline or discordant coastline, in the lithology, you might find things like bedding planes, you might find vertical joints, you might find some seaward dips of the cliffs, etc. Whereas the geology is all about the types of rocks specifically. So there we're talking about hard and soft rock, we're talking about metamorphic, igneous and sedimentary rocks. The geology is all about the rock type and the characteristics of the rock, whereas the lithology is about the coast type and the characteristics. Another A-level question here. So an example of a ria in the UK would be Kingsbury Estuary in southern England. So that's near Salcombe. You've also got another one near Falmouth. Ria is basically a flooded river valley, or flooded V-shaped valley, and the valley flooded because of the rise in sea levels after the ice age. So it's basically an example of a submerged coastline due to a rise in eustatic levels. Okay, and the fjord is exactly the same, except it's a flooded U-shaped glacial valley. And the examples of fjords, well, there's all of those in Scandinavia and New Zealand, but in the case of the UK, most of the Scottish lochs, like Loch Ness and Loch Lomond, they would be examples of fjords, which is why the UK keeps its nuclear submarines, for example, over there, because they're really deep U-shaped valleys that have been flooded as the sea level rose at the end of the last ice age. Okay, that's a big difference between the sea level rise. Overall can be attributed to 4 different factors. One is isostatic change, which is a change in the land level due to the rebound after the end of the last ice age, as that's land going up in relation to the sea, and tectonic activity, which is sometimes the seabed goes up because of a volcanic eruption or an earthquake. Okay, so that happened, for example, after the tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami. That's it for the land. For the sea level, sometimes the sea level goes up in relation to the land. That's called eustatic change. It happens as a result of terrestrial ice melting and entering the sea, or because of climate change that causes temperatures to increase, and high temperatures mean high ocean temperatures, and hotter water expands as a volume, therefore it takes more space. So most of the current sea level rise is actually attributed to thermal expansion or climate change. Okay, so there's two different: isostatic and tectonics on one side, eustatic and climate change on the other. A big misunderstanding here in geography. Well, mitigation is reducing the causes of an impact. So mitigation is about reducing the problem in the first place. In the case of climate change, for example, it's about reducing the amount of CO2 being emitted. So that's using renewables, planting some trees, carbon capture storage, etc. Whereas adaptation is you're not doing anything about the causes or the problem. You're just dealing with the consequences and the impact. So you might build houses on stilts. You might have a more resilient crops, etc. You're not doing anything about the problem, you're just dealing with the consequences. Okay, so mitigation, you're reducing the root causes of the problem. Adaptation, you're dealing with the consequences of the increasing problem. There's no way I can answer the question in one story, but the crux of it is there's a really, really strong link. Every 1 degree increase in temperature will increase soil moisture in the atmosphere by 7%. Okay, so basically, as the carbon cycle gets unbalanced through anthropogenic causes of climate change, we're going to increase the rate at which our atmosphere can hold water. Therefore, the storms are going to increase in intensity and in severity. And although it might rain less across the year, when it does rain, it'll be more devastating every single time. Okay. There's also a link with if you cut trees down, it means there'll be less evapotranspiration, so there'll be less rain in rainforests, and so it leads to something called forest diebacks, which is a link to the carbon cycle, but also a link with the water cycle. So there's lots and lots of links, but these are probably the 2 standout links. So this is aimed at both A-level and GCSE. The answer is it depends on your school, but for my school here in Redland, no, you don't. So in GCSE, in section C, which is physical landscapes, you've got 3 units. You've got rivers, you've got coast, and you've got glaciers. schools get to choose which ones they teach, and they have to teach 2 of the 3. We choose to teach rivers and coasts, so you're going to have to leave the glaciation section fully blank, okay? If you fill it in, you can, but you're wasting time because it means you'll have more marks than minutes in that paper. Same for A-level. A-level, we have to teach coasts or glaciers. We teach coasts, so again, leave the glacial section blank. You do not need to answer it. It's in your paper. You haven't learned about it. It's normal. We didn't choose to teach it, so do not answer those sections in both A-level and GCSE paper. This is a GCSE question. The answer is our case study is a hot desert. Okay, so there's a big difference in geography between case studies and examples. I've made a whole video on YouTube about this. An example is a lesson, it's something you did for 1 lesson, whereas a case study is something you spend several lessons over. Okay, in the case of hot deserts, our case study is the Western Desert. We spent a good number of lessons on that. Okay. Basis of that for revision, well, it depends on who you are. I've made a whole video about this, but the key thing is practice, practice, practice. Okay, do some past exam questions, revising Seneca and revising some notes and some flashcards and some highlighted stuff. Brilliant. We're not actively doing much with those revisions. So once you've learned the content, I really encourage you to do past exam questions. Do not necessarily do them all in full, but try and practice planning out as many as you possibly can, because there's only so many ways you can ask questions about earthquakes or tropical storms. So the more you do, the more you practice, the easier it'll be when you see the exam, because you'll think, oh, I did something similar at home. Correct. Paper 1 is all about physical geography and only about this. Okay, so at GCSE, section A is going to be living world. Section B is going to be natural hazards, and section C is going to be physical landscapes, and that includes rivers and coasts. Okay, you ignore glaciation completely because you didn't have to learn about. You only need to learn about 2 of the 3 units in physical landscapes. Okay, so we do rivers and coasts. At A level, it's similar. It's going to be tectonics, and then we teach coasts. We don't teach glaciers, so you leave glaciers alone. You learn about coasts, and then it'll be carbon and water in year 13. Okay, but those are the only topics that'll be included in paper 1 for both A level and GCSE. So this is a GCSE question. Our case study for the is an example of a hot desert is a Western desert indeed. Las Vegas is the biggest city in the hot desert. So the answer is you do need to know a few facts, like the number of people who visit Las Vegas every year and why Las Vegas could provide some opportunities, etc. But it's not going to make your answer. Okay, so if you remember, the structure for your long answers is your point, your evidence, that's where you add your facts, but the key ways in which you get marks, 75% of the marks are then going to be on the analysis, the counterpoint, and the explanation, okay? So facts, yes, but we don't expect you to become Wikipedia pages and know everything off by heart. We expect you to provide a fact and actually explain its implications and how it affects the world in a wider way, okay? So don't get obsessed with itty-gritty facts. I want you to get obsessed with explaining what they mean and why they're important. This is predominantly an A-level question. I want to clarify massive misunderstanding, okay? Sea levels rise when ice melts. True. But only if this ice comes from terrestrial land, okay? Because it gets added to the volume of water in the ocean. If it's an ice sheet in, say, the North Pole that melts, it's not necessarily going to make the sea level rise, okay? So the best way to illustrate that is if you make a drink and you put an ice cube in it, with an ice cube, it might be absolutely full. When the ice cube melts, it won't necessarily make your drink overflow because it's the same volume of water. It's just different density, okay, that gets added into water. If anything, it might drop a bit because ice it floats, okay? So melting sea ice is not going to make sea levels rise. What will make sea level rise is melting ice that is on land or on continents like Antarctica or glaciers.